Welcome, time travelers. You are about to embark on a journey through space and time. Join us as we go back to the last great decade. Here is your host for the Time Traveler's Guide to the 80s, Jamie Benedict.
Hello and welcome to the Time Traveler's Guide to the 80s, where we know that Mrs. Voorhees was the original killer in the Friday the 13th movies. I am Jamie Benedict, and thank you for joining me on this journey back to the last great decade. In this episode, we are going to travel back in time to take a look at the must-see Halloween movies of the 80s. So full disclosure here, I don't like horror movies, and I certainly didn't like them a lot when I was growing up. There are some of them that still give me the creeps today. And so talking about these and going back through all of them, I look at them and I go, oh my gosh, I remember hating this as a kid. Some of them I can watch today because it's not so bad anymore. I'm a grown-up, for crying out loud. I know that this isn't real. But this all stems from the very first vampire movie that I ever saw, and that was a movie called Salem's Lot from, I think, 1979. And I think I saw it on HBO. My neighbors had it playing on TV, and so I was over at their house and I watched it. And from that point, I remember that I always slept with my back to the wall, and I always slept with the blankets pulled up over my neck because I was just terrified of vampires. So I never really got into that entire horror sort of movie theme. It didn't interest me. I don't think I saw Friday the 13th in theaters. Actually, I know I didn't see Friday the 13th in theaters. I know I didn't see it until I was probably 13 or 14 years old. Same thing with some of the other, classic horror movies like Halloween and things like that. I do love psychological thrillers. This is one of my favorite genres, and I find it odd that I like these psychological thrillers because what scares me most about horror movies is the possibility of ending up in that situation, being chased by a homicidal maniac in a hockey mask who's carrying a machete. That terrifies me. But the idea that an actual person who is tormenting a family, a town, or whatever it is, that doesn't scare me. So I'm not quite sure why I like the psychological thrillers, because I'm far more likely to end up in a situation like that than I am being chased by a Michael Myers type character or a Freddy Krueger type character. So I don't quite get my fascination there, but that's just how I am. Now, the 80s did have some great psychological thrillers, but I don't think that all of those psychological thrillers make for great Halloween movies. So when I was looking at my list, I was looking for things like fitting into the horror genre as opposed to just the psychological thriller category. That was important to me. And I think the horror genre has to have some element of fantasy to it. It has to have some unrealistic component that falls into that category. The other thing that I wanted to look for was whether or not it fit the Halloween season and not just being a scary movie. Scary movies are great, and there's a lot of them, but that doesn't make them necessarily great for Halloween. So for this list, I was looking for quality in the movie as well. I wanted it to be well written, well acted for the most part. I understand that there's a little bit of leeway that I have to give, but I really wasn't looking for something that was just over the top ridiculous. Maybe I'll do that list next year for Halloween, and I'll make that the podcast episode. So I also avoided sequels if the original was not released in the 80s. So I've already mentioned Halloween, and I know that's probably the obvious selection for this, right? It's Halloween. How can it not be on the list of Halloween movies? But the original Halloween movie with Jamie Lee Curtis came out in 1978. So any subsequent movies are just spin-offs of that. And to be honest with you, they're not as good as the original, right? That's almost the case in every scenario where the sequel is just not as good as the original one. So had Halloween been created in the 1980s, even if it were right at 1980, that would definitely be on the list, but it is not going to be on the list today. What other movies are not on my list? Pretty much anything by Stephen King. The guy is the master of horror, right? He's the master of thrillers. He is the master of suspense. So you get movies like The Shining, Children of the Corn, Christine, and Cujo, and all those others that fit in there. And they're great, scary movies. I don't necessarily think that makes them Halloween movies. I think the closest that Stephen King gets to a great Halloween movie is probably The Shining, just because there are some supernatural sort of elements there. But to be honest with you, I've watched The Shining a 1,000 times. I love that movie. I don't know that that's so much supernatural as it is just a man losing his mind and starting to see things. I don't know that it's necessarily ghosts. I know there's something that speaks to the kid. It's The Shining. That's the element. But I think this is just a guy losing his mind and he's going crazy because of isolation. And I think a lot of us can relate to something like that. So I'm not putting any of the Stephen King movies in here. Although if we want to expand the list and you want to look at movies maybe for the entire month, Children of the Corn is a great one to put in there. The Shining is a great one to put in there. Christine is a great one to put in there. But I don't think it's necessarily the top 8 based on just true Halloween style. I also didn't put Friday the 13th on here, only because it says right in the title what this is for. This is for Friday the 13th. On Friday the 13th, absolutely, you should be watching Friday the 13th. And if you have time all day, then watch all of them because it's a great, scary movie for Friday the 13th. It is. I don't know that necessarily makes it a great Halloween movie. But again, if you want to expand your list and you're going to spend an entire month doing this, then throw Friday the 13th in there. This next one, I might start a controversy here, and you guys might think I'm crazy here, but I'm going to put Gremlins under Christmas movie for the same reason that I put Die Hard as a Christmas movie, and I make my entire family mad at me every time I talk about that. Gremlins is set at Christmas. This is a Christmas present that's being bought from a father to a son, and that makes it a Christmas movie. I don't care what you guys say. That's what it is. So we're going to take Gremlins off of the Halloween list. Now, if we want to go to the ridiculousness of this, Killer Clowns from Outer Space. It's a decent movie. It's one that's worth watching, but it's just ridiculous. Like, it's not, to me, it's not even well done ridiculous. It's like creepy costumes, poorly made. It looks low budget from beginning to end. There's nothing scary about it. You want a scary character that's a clown? Watch It. That's a later version, though. It's not an 80s movie. I think it was 1990 when the original of that came out. So watch It if you want to get a scary movie there about clowns, but not, Killer Clowns from Outer Space, not going to make the top 8 here. And if you followed the Facebook page, I've been doing Halloween costumes and Halloween movies or scary movies all month long. And I referenced a movie about, gosh, I don't even remember who the killer was in this, but I remember a ridiculous scene of a javelin being thrown, and it seems like it's flying through the air forever. And then it goes right through 5 cheerleaders. I couldn't even remember the name of the movie. My cousin, who follows the page, he posted this and he shared the clip. So if you want it is on the Facebook page. And it's in one of the comments where I talk about student bodies or something like that, another ridiculous horror movie. But Pandemonium was the name of this movie. And the javelin scene is the only one that I remember from that entire movie. I just remember it was completely stupid. This was one of the dumbest movies I've ever seen in my life. Now, this one, I'm just going to talk about this for a second, and then I'll move into the actual list. All month long, I was trying to put up horror movies or scary movies, and I type in horror movies of the 80s, and you get these lists on Google. And Teen Wolf 2 kept coming up as a horror movie of the 80s. But what I found most interesting there is that Teen Wolf doesn't come up on that list. So the sequel, which was awful, starring Jason Bateman, falls into the horror genre. But the original with Michael J. Fox, the good one, the one that's worth watching over and over and over again, does not show up on there, even as a comedy horror movie. And he turns into the werewolf. He's somewhat scary at times. You know, I get it. But how can one be there and not the other? That one I don't quite understand. So we're not going to put that on the list of 80s movies that you need to watch. So let's talk about which ones are on the list. And the first one that I want to put on my list,
number 8.
Coming in at number 8 on the list is Transylvania 6-5000. This is a fantasy comedy movie. So this movie, written and directed by Rudy DeLuca, stars Jeff Goldblum, Ed Begley Jr., Joseph Bologna, Carol Kane, Gina Davis, and Michael Richards makes an appearance in this movie. He's part of this movie. You would think this movie would be awesome. One of the reviews on this movie, I think gets credited as the shortest reviews ever. Leonard Maltin of Entertainment Tonight. This was his review. Transylvania 6-5000 stunk. I'm Leonard Maltin, Entertainment Tonight. I think that's funny. I find that review to be probably spot on. I remember the movie. I remember it being kind of funny. You know, maybe in my head, maybe because I just like Jeff Goldblum and I like Gina Davis. So maybe that's why I find that to be interesting. And of course, Michael Richards, if you're just looking for, you know, slapstick, fall down comedy, Michael Richards is your guy. And that's how he got the part in this movie. But this is a movie about 2 reporters going to Transylvania to do a story on Frankenstein's monster. And they're basically told, come back with a story or don't come back at all. And so they are investigative reporters that are being laughed at by locals who are, you know, think they're crazy. You know, what are you talking about? There's no monsters here in Transylvania. And of course, they start to figure out there's something suspicious about this entire thing. Gina Davis plays a vampiress, a nymphomaniac vampiress at that. And so you've got all these weird characters that are coming in. It's very Clue-like. And if you enjoyed Clue, I really think you'll enjoy Transylvania 6-5000. That's kind of the same mentality it's written in. This was the first of 3 movies that starred Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis. They were also in The Fly together and Earth Girls Are Easy. Those 2 are a dynamic team. Gina Davis is brilliant. Jeff Goldblum, of course, very well known from Jurassic Park, just brilliant. I always liked him. But DeLuca wrote this movie with the intention that this was going to star Tom Hanks and Peter Scolari. If you know those 2 from the 80s, they starred together in Bosom Buddies. I think that would have been a really good team to see together as well. I think this would have been a really good made-for-TV movie or maybe even a really good television series with Hanks and Scolari. I think those two would have been brilliant here. And sometimes you can't say that about actors. You look at it and you go, oh, I just can't see anyone else playing that role. But in this case, I could see Tom Hanks and Peter Scolari playing those spots. But they never really made that come to fruition as far as that goes. And so they turned that down. They turned down Paul Reiser for this also. They just said they'd never heard of him, so they really didn't find that to be interesting. So this was a movie that was released in theaters on November 8th, 1985. It grossed $7,196,872 at the box office on a $3 million budget. That's not bad for the 1980s. So I think that's a very successful movie. Definitely one that is worth the watch.
Number 7.
All right, my number 7 movie is one that comes from one of my favorite writers and directors, and that is John Landis. This is An American Werewolf in London from 1981. John Landis says this is his favorite of his own films. This is the one he likes the most. And it starred David Naughton and Griffin Dunne. David Naughton, you might remember from the Dr. Pepper commercials. I'm a pepper, you're a pepper, wouldn't you like to be a pepper too? That's David Naughton. And this is just such a good movie. Landis, though, was getting ready for the re-release of this in 2010. And he said at that time, when he was doing the approval for everything on this release, he said he just did not realize how gory this movie was until that point. And it really is a gory movie. This is not one for you to watch with the entire family. It's not one that you should watch with the kids, because they are not going to do well with this. It's a great movie from a cinematic standpoint. It's a great movie from a makeup standpoint. This is the first film to win the Academy Award for Best Makeup, and it was a category created in 1981, but it's just brilliant. In fact, this one was so powerful with the makeup that Michael Jackson wanted to get the entire makeup crew together for his Thriller video. And he had John Landis direct the Thriller video. And so Landis got all of these people together. If you watch the face-changing scene for the movie where he transforms into a werewolf, this is one, it was done in one take. The entire take lasted 7 seconds. And the guy who created the technology for this just thought, what a waste, because he spent months putting this technology together and making all of this happen for a 7-second video shot. But if you watch Michael Jackson's Thriller, it has the exact same setup as far as having the movement in the face and things like that. Now, they really messed with people on this one. And when this was released in theaters, the marquee said, from the director of National Lampoon's Animal House. So when people saw that, they thought, oh, great, this is going to be a funny movie. They thought they were going to see a comedy. Most of them left the theater terrified because of the graphic nature of this movie. They did not do well with that. So that's a caution for you on this one if you're going to watch it. Yes, it's gory, but it is so well done. John Landis is brilliant as a director, so definitely worth the watch on that one.
Number 6.
Coming in at number 6 for me was Child's Play. Written by Don Mancini, directed by Tom Holland in 1988, starring Catherine Hicks, Chris Sarandon, and Alex Vincent. This is what makes this so creepy is anytime we start getting into selling your soul, you know, if you are messing around with the soul, and I do believe in a spirit world. I think that there's something else out there. And so just putting your soul into something else can be terrifying. And when you do it into a children's toy, or really any other human or object, it seems like it's an unlikely scenario, but in this particular case, it works and it's terrifying. So Chucky is a doll that there's a serial killer. His name's Charles Lee Ray. He's trying to evade police, and so the way he does it is he does a Haitian incantation that moves his soul into this doll so that he cannot be captured. So Charles Lee Ray was a name that had been created by Mancini, and he took this from a combination of Charles Manson, Lee Harvey Oswald, and James Earl Ray. So we know who Charles Manson is, great, the big cult leader from the 60s and 70s with the Manson family and all of that out in California. Lee Harvey Oswald is the guy who shot Kennedy, and James Earl Ray is the guy who shot Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He combined their three names to Charles Lee Ray and created the doll Chucky. In the original script for this, though, Chucky's name was Buddy. And Buddy killed anyone who went against Andy. So Andy is the boy who gets the doll. He takes possession of it. And in this particular case, the doll befriends Andy and then does all of the killing. In the movie, the idea was, or the original script, the idea was to keep the audience in suspense as long as possible. Who is the real killer here? Is Andy doing the killing, or is the doll doing all the killing? And personally, I'm glad when it's not kids that are doing the killing. I have such a hard time with that. And I know it's a doll. That's what makes it great. That's the fantasy element to it. That's the unrealistic element to it. I don't like it when kids turn into killers. I don't know. I like the innocence of children. To me, that's just a better storyline. Let's keep kids innocent there. But this is one, if you're watching on the Facebook show or you happen to catch this on YouTube, I've got a picture of the Chucky doll there from Movie Stills Database, and the doll is very similar to a toy that came out in 1985 called My Buddy. So I said just a few minutes ago that the original name of the doll was going to be Buddy. That was changed in part because of this My Buddy doll that had been released in 1985. And I think what's ironic about this is that the original script was written in an effort to make fun of the marketing of toys to children, and then it morphed into this horror film. And so I find that to be kind of ironic that they would make it so close to that My Buddy doll, and then at the same time try to poke fun at that and do all that. So it is a really good movie. I still find this one to be pretty scary. That doll is creepy. And you hear stories all the time. One of them that comes up with dolls that come to life in your home is Furby had that, but there have been others that fall into that category of coming to life and just being really, I don't know. It's just weird. So. All right.
Number 5.
All right. My number 5 movie comes from Wes Craven, and that is A Nightmare on Elm Street from 1984. Starred Heather Langenkamp and Robert Englund, and this was Johnny Depp's very first movie that he ever made. Wes Craven's daughter had a little crush on Johnny Depp, and that's why he was cast in the role. Heather Langenkamp, she's got several movie credits to her name. In fact, she just finished up a movie here in 2019, so she's still acting. This is probably her biggest success, is the Nightmare series of films. This is one area where you might recognize Heather Langenkamp from is if you watch TV shows in the 80s, she was on Growing Pains for several episodes. And then when that show was kind of nearing its end, they spun off a show called Just the 10 of Us. And it was about her family. If you remember, it was the PE teacher and his 10 children, I think it was. And they spun that movie off, or that TV show off, and that's where you might remember her from. Otherwise, you probably have not seen her in anything. Robert Englund, he does appear in some things. He does a lot of horror films. Obviously, he plays Freddy Krueger here, and this is an iconic role that Englund put together. I mean, he is the ultimate Freddy Krueger here. So Fred Krueger is an actual person who was bullied, or who bullied Wes Craven as a child. And so I think this was how Craven got his ultimate revenge, which I find comical as well. This falls into the fantasy horror genre. The whole movie is based on the premise of this killer, Freddy Krueger, coming back in the dreams of the children of the people who killed him. So Freddy Krueger was a murderer. Vigilante justice took place. They kill Freddy Krueger, the parents, and then the children now have to pay the price for the sins of the father, if you will. So this is where that storyline falls in, and I like it. I think this one was probably the best, but Nightmare on Elm Street 3 was the first one that I ever saw, I believe. And so I find that one to be very interesting. I don't remember much about Nightmare 2. I don't remember anything beyond 3, but this one was clearly the best of the movies. Just filmed in 32 days, and they put the entire thing together. I love it. Now, Heather Langenkamp, we talked about her not being all that well known. Let me tell you some of the names that were on the list to play this star character in here, the lead in this movie. Jennifer Grey from Dirty Dancing and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Demi Moore from a lot of the Brat Pack movies. She's been in everything but Ghost and a lot of those. Courtney Cox, you remember from Friends. Tracy Gold, she was on Growing Pains. And Claudia Wells. Claudia Wells, you might recognize the name, you might not. She was Michael J. Fox's girlfriend in Back to the Future. She played in just part 1 and then was not able to return for the sequels of that movie. So if you are watching this one, again, not one to watch with the children, but there is just an ominous nursery rhyme that goes along with that Freddy Krueger thing that I won't even repeat because it's just creepy. Like, that's the kind of thing that gets stuck in your head, and then you're going to have your own nightmares from watching this movie. It's just that kind of scary.
Number 4.
Number 4 is one that I think fits the whole horror Halloween genre very, very well, and that is Poltergeist from 1982. This was directed by Tobe Hooper from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. He directed that movie, so he was no stranger to directing scary movies. Written by Steven Spielberg, who was going to do more work with Poltergeist and did spend a lot more time on the set of Poltergeist than he had intended to, but he was directing E.T. at the same time. So while E.T. was in some production shutdowns, he was over at the Poltergeist set, which were only a few blocks apart in their filming. While he was casting this, and if you guys aren't familiar with the movie, it stars Craig T. Nelson as the father, Jo Beth Williams as the mother, and Heather O'Rourke as Carol Ann. And she is the conduit, if you will, from the other side to the family. So she brings the darker side of the world over to the lighter side of the world. Heather O'Rourke was brilliant in this. She had such an innocent look, which is exactly what Steven Spielberg was going for. Drew Barrymore auditioned for this role as well, and he just didn't think that Drew had the angelic look, the sweetness about her, but he loved her audition. So, of course, when he saw her audition, loved what she was about, really liked her as an actress, took her over to E.T., and filmed that movie with her. And of course, she went on to incredible stardom after that movie. So this was one that, in addition to the fear of the unknown, the spirit world, you also have the fears that go on in your house every day that children experience. And so Carol Ann's brother is a character named Robbie, and he is being tormented by two fears in his room. One is a clown, and the other is the tree just outside his bedroom window. Those were brought into the writing by Spielberg. Those were his two childhood fears. And so he brought them to life and put them into this movie. And I think a lot of us can relate. You get the storm moving, the lightning flashing, and you see that tree swaying outside your window. And of course, clowns freak out a lot of people. I've never been scared of clowns. I don't get it, but there's a lot of people who are. Now, of course, the clown comes to life in the movie, and there's a great scene in that movie where the clown has come to life and he is choking the character Robbie, played by Oliver Robbins in this movie. And he's choking, and it's obviously an effect, but Robbie's yelling, "I can't breathe." And Spielberg, who was on the set that day, and Tobe Hooper thought the kid was just ad-libbing. You know, they thought, man, these guys really getting into the performance. So they just kept telling him, just look at the camera. Just look at the camera. And of course, then they realized, oh my gosh, this is bad. Spielberg saw his face turning purple and thought, oh, he really can't breathe. So he had to run over and remove the clown's arms from around Robbie's neck. So there's a lot of fear in that particular scene as you're watching that. So it kind of adds a little bit of realism there. Speaking of realism in this, real human skeletons were used in the swimming pool scene. And that to me is just crazy. You couldn't get me into that swimming pool. They thought that fake skeletons would have been too expensive and too complicated to deal with. So they just went with the real thing. I don't even know how anyone could do that. I know they did not tell JoBeth Williams that was the case. This was always one of the stories that surrounded it, and people thought it was an urban legend. No, that's stupid. They didn't use real skeletons. They did use real skeletons there. They did not tell her about that. So in the swimming pool scene, JoBeth Williams was afraid, but it wasn't of the skeletons. She was afraid that with all of the electrical, something might fall into the water and kill her. And so to ease her fears, Steven Spielberg got down into the water with her and said, okay, we're going to film this scene, and if anything falls in here, we're both fried. And really what she should have been afraid of was the actual skeletons being used in there. There's a lot that goes around this movie as far as the curse. In a lot of horror movies, you'll hear about the curse of a particular movie. This is what happens when you mess with the spirit world, right? You get these curses in there. Heather O'Rourke died at the age of 12. She ended up having an internal thing that was misdiagnosed, and it ended up killing her. A guy named Lou Perryman was killed with an axe. Like, you read the story and you go, this isn't real, right? This is crazy. Nope, he was killed with an axe. And Dominique Dunne, who played, I think she was one of the daughters in this movie, she was murdered in her driveway by her ex-boyfriend. And so you've got these killings that went on around it. Now, there's certainly not suspicious deaths, so there's not anything like that. But people attached a curse to it because, hey, that's what makes the great storyline. This one here, again, not one for the kids. Definitely a great watch. And I do think it holds up. I know they did a reboot of it. I haven't seen the reboot, but this is a great watch. I love the original, and it is terrifying. It is definitely one that is worth watching during the Halloween season.
Number 3.
number 3 was a hard one for me to watch because of my fear of vampires, and that was The Lost Boys, 1987, directed by Joel Schumacher, written by Jan Fisher and James Jeremias. This is a star-studded cast, though. Jason Patric, Corey Haim, Kiefer Sutherland, Jamie Gertz, Corey Feldman, and I'm going to mention him only because nobody knows who he is, other than he's the guy from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, and that is Alex Winter. Alex Winter appears in a lot of movies that nobody ever paid attention to. Nobody ever really even knows the guy's name. But we know him as Bill from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. He is also in this movie. I like Alex Winter. You know, Alex, if you're watching this, you know, don't take it personally. It's, you know, I love you. But, you know, it's one that a lot of people don't really know who you are by name. I think you understand that. So vampire movies are always a classic, though. And that goes back to the original Dracula movies with Bela Lugosi. And, you know, it carries on. I mean, vampires are always a fascinating subject when you look at the movie industry. In fact, Schumacher said the reason he directed this film is because vampires are hot. They're the only erotic monsters. This is Schumacher's words, not mine. Frankenstein is not hot. So that's why he chose to do this. And they are. They're a classic. And we see this time and time again. I mentioned Salem's Lot earlier, watching that one as a kid. Great vampire movie. If you grew up in the 90s watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the movie and the TV series, just both really well done. We have this fascination with them. I will not go so far as to say that we need to include the Twilight saga in this when it comes to a fascination with vampires. I'm not going to do that. But real vampire stuff is what we're talking about here. So this was the movie that the Coreys starred in together for the very first time. And Corey Feldman was fired from the movie and then rehired to the movie because of a drug addiction at that time. Now, he was only about 16 years old here. He had already had a pretty long career in Hollywood. He'd done quite a few programs. So he had some experience in this world, but he had already been addicted to drugs here and was falling asleep during filming and just was crazy. And they got rid of him. He came back, apologized, said he would be more professional on set. And apparently he was. Now, the filming only lasted 3 weeks, so it's not like he had to hold out that long. The original script for this movie had the vampires appearing as children, so closer to elementary, middle school age kids. And when Schumacher took over, he forced the change to teenagers just to make it a little bit sexier and more interesting. Because again, vampires are hot, right? So this is what he was trying to accomplish there. Now, Kiefer Sutherland didn't really want to be in the movie originally, but he heard that INXS and Jimmy Barnes were scheduled to do some of the songs for the soundtrack, and he just loved those two groups. Kiefer Sutherland is a great vampire. Even when you watch him in other movies, he's a great bad guy. He's just got that ominous, scary voice, that deep tone that I think just makes him a little bit eerie. This one here is just, you know, it's just kind of creepy. I like the movie. I'll rewatch it. But again, I don't have a fascination with vampires, partly because I don't know the rules of vampires. You know, when are they allowed to get you? What are all the rules for vampires? Because I don't think they all apply in this particular movie. So I have to go back and rewatch that and see if all the vampire stuff applies here that we are familiar with, as far as inviting them in and the garlic and things like that. Some of that just becomes too much.
Number 2.
Number 2 is one of my favorite movies, and that is Beetlejuice from 1988, written and directed by Tim Burton. This is the 10th highest grossing film of 1988 and had a phenomenal cast. Alec Baldwin, Gina Davis, Michael Keaton, Catherine O'Hara, and Winona Ryder. Just a phenomenal casting for this movie. And Michael Keaton, who plays the star character Beetlejuice, says that this is the favorite movie that he made. So this is the favorite of all of his own movies. And as the star character, you would think like this is all about him. And the movie is about him, but it doesn't include him. He's only in 14 and a half minutes of the entire movie, which is very rare for a title character, for a starring character to be in there for such a short time. And I think when you watch this, I think this gives you a different perspective of what Michael Keaton was all about. I think it gives you a great look at the dimension that Keaton can bring to a character. In this movie, he ad-libbed 90% of the lines in this movie. And I was listening to an interview with Matthew McConaughey on the Howard Stern Show, and he talked about these things called launch pad lines. And it's basically where you get a line in a movie and then you're told basically you could just take this whatever direction you think the character would go in it. And I think that's what Michael Keaton was able to do here. We were not really used to seeing him in this kind of role, and to watch him break out and do this brilliant version of the ghost with the most, babe, and see his over the top character playing off of Gina Davis and Alec Baldwin, who really played the straight character in this very well. They delivered the straight lines the way they were supposed to, and Michael Keaton just hammered home the brilliant comedy that he was capable of in this spot. And I don't know that any other actor could have pulled off this role of the serious and the comedic all in one meshed character. It's just some other people who were considered for the role: Dustin Hoffman, Robin Williams, Christopher Lloyd, Jim Carrey, Tim Curry, Jack Nicholson, Bill Murray, Robert De Niro, and John Cleese. And you have both sides of the spectrum here. Robin Williams, Jim Carrey, Bill Murray, they're going to give you great comedic performances. I think Robin Williams and Jim Carrey might have been too over the top in this, trying to steal every scene, because they can do that. They can take over a scene and leave the rest of the cast in the dust. And then you've got the very serious side of Dustin Hoffman, Jack Nicholson, De Niro, and even John Cleese in there. Tim Curry plays a great dark comedic character, which he might have been able to pull this one off. That might have worked. But in this particular case, I don't think there was anyone better than Michael Keaton for that role. I can't see anyone else in that spot. Playing the straight character of Gina Davis, Kirstie Alley was the first choice that was brought up there. Cheers wouldn't let her out of the contract. So they looked at Sigourney Weaver, who I think would play this a little too mature. She's great at that type of character. That's what we saw from her in Aliens. That's what we see from her in Ghostbusters. She plays a very great mature role. Not an old role. I don't want to confuse that. She just plays the role very mature-like. Linda Blair, who we remember from The Exorcist, I don't know if she can make that role her own. Goldie Hawn, Laura Dern, Linda Hamilton also considered for that part in this movie. So then we come down to Winona Ryder, who's playing the role of Lydia, and she's up against Alyssa Milano for the final casting in this role. And she beats out Alyssa Milano because of her role in the movie Lucas. So Winona Ryder starred with Charlie Sheen and Corey Haim in that movie, and just played. She was brilliant in that movie, by the way. And she plays this dark teen here, so it just works out really well. But other actors who were considered for this role: Lori Loughlin, you might remember from Full House; Diane Lane, you will remember. I think Diane Lane plays it far more mature as well. I don't think that that's the right role for her. I only remember Diane Lane, though, in some of her 90s and 2000 movies. Sarah Jessica Parker, who we remember from, if you watched 80s TV show Square Pegs, That's where she got her start, but also from Sex and the City. Brooke Shields, who had already done a couple of really good movies during that time, the biggest being the Blue Lagoon, and then Justine Bateman from Family Ties, Molly Ringwald, member of the Brat Pack, and Jennifer Connelly, who was an up-and-coming star at that time. And again, I don't see anyone else in this role but Winona Ryder. I think she's the character that they were looking for here. So I think it was perfectly cast, and that combination makes this movie just amazing. Now let's talk about Tim Burton, because I think Tim Burton brings out the best in actors in general. Tim Burton is the strangest director around, maybe. You know, Tim Burton is a weird dude. If you've watched The Nightmare Before Christmas, that's an off-center type of movie. And here's what I like about Tim Burton, though, and I think he really gets into the right frame of mind when doing this. And I remember the story about Tim Burton. He did not tell this, but I have visited Salt Lake City a couple of times. And when I'm in Salt Lake City, I stayed at this hotel called the Shiloh Inn. And I've stayed there a few times over the years. And I love that hotel. I don't know if it still exists there anymore, but I love the hotel. And the hotel is supposed to be incredibly haunted. From personal experiences, I can tell you that I experienced things there that I have not experienced anywhere else. So there was some weirdness that went on. But there's a room in the Shiloh at the very top floor, and what I heard was that Tim Burton, when he is getting ready to write one of these dark comedy type movies, is he calls the Shiloh Inn and books that room so that he can be immersed in the supernatural, if you will. He wants to be in that environment. And I heard this on a ghost tour. I decided to take one of those ghost tours while I was in Salt Lake City. And the first stop on the tour is the Shiloh Inn, which kind of freaked me out because before that I did not realize all of this stuff took place there. But they were talking about Tim Burton and him reserving that particular room because he knows the history of it and he wanted to be immersed in that. And I think that just creates the mindset. And I think that's what created the mindset here for Beetlejuice was just being in that environment. And this is a movie I think you can watch with the family because Tim Burton does a good job of balancing the dark with the light. And I think you can watch it with the whole family. I think the characters are scary enough that it does make it a good Halloween movie, but at the same time, they're likable enough that it makes it a fun movie for the family. And that's what makes it, I think, the perfect number 2 movie on this list.
Number 1.
All right, so the number 1 movie on my list of movies to watch during the Halloween season is, I think, an obvious one, and that is Ghostbusters 1984, directed by Ivan Reitman, written by Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis, starring Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Sigourney Weaver, Harold Ramis, Ernie Hudson, Rick Moranis, Annie Potts, and just a brilliant, brilliant cast from top to bottom in this movie. Just unbelievable. And if we get into this movie, Bill Murray, one of the great ad-libbers in Hollywood. Most of his lines in this movie are ad-libbed, as they were with pretty much everything else he had done up to that point. They give Bill Murray an idea and they just turn him loose, and you leave the cameras running and he's going to give you brilliance. Almost none of the scenes were filmed as they were scripted. So everything had ad-libbing in it to a certain degree, and I think that makes the movie even more brilliant to watch is just the fact that these guys are just doing what they do best, and they're coming up with comedy genius, everywhere along the way. And the role of Winston, which is played by Ernie Hudson in the movie, was originally written for Eddie Murphy and would have been a much bigger role. When Eddie Murphy turned it down, they shortened the role and brought the character of Winston in a little bit later in the movie. The original movie had Eddie Murphy in basically from the beginning on this. But could you imagine the cast of this movie and throwing Eddie Murphy in, one of the great comedians of the 80s, into that spot at the time? So he turned down that role. The role that is played by Bill Murray, I see Bill Murray here. It was originally written for John Belushi. And Belushi died while Dan Aykroyd was writing the film. And they wanted him to play the Venkman character. I don't think that this movie turns out as great. I love John Belushi. I think he was a great comedian. But, you know, I remember him from Animal House, and his character is just like wild, off the wall. And I don't think that that's what this character needed. It needed somebody who could ad-lib these lines and still play it sort of straight and comedic at the same time. And Belushi was all about the laughs. And I think everybody, you know, kind of looked at him that way. He's all about the laughs. So Aykroyd refers to Slimer, the green ghost in the movie, as the ghost of John Belushi for that movie. So it's kind of written, if you look at the character, you kind of see some of the similarities. But this was the highest grossing comedy of all time until Home Alone came out in 1990. Probably gave us some of the greatest quotable moments of movies during that time. Dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. I can't tell you the number of times that I have used that line in everyday conversations. So I do love quoting this movie. Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, another one of those great icons from the movie. You know, I need to get me a Stay Puft Marshmallow Man t-shirt, because this is the character that made the movie. Only shows up at the end, and he's melted immediately, basically, you know, like nobody steps on a church in my town and let's roast them. And then they fire him up, and he's melted. Each Stay Puft Marshmallow Man costume cost $20,000 to make. They made 3 of them. They destroyed all 3 during the filming of this movie. But just iconic characters. There's just so much about this movie. And the great thing about it is that it is family friendly. It is a fun Halloween movie that will be enjoyed by all ages. And this is a good one. If you're starting your kids out on 80s movies, this is a good place to start. It's funny. It's clever. It's brilliantly done. It's got great acting. It's got some great comedic performances. This is just a great movie for the whole family. So that is my list of the must-see movies for the Halloween time period. So if you are looking for anything to do during the Halloween season, check this out and take a look at those movies. Let me know what you think on the Facebook page. Tell me where I went wrong, and let me know what I did right. So thank you for joining me for this episode of the Time Traveler's Guide to the 80s. Don't forget to like the Facebook page at the Time Traveler's Guide to the 80s and share this episode with your friends. Also subscribe to my YouTube channel at the Time Traveler's Guide to the 80s so you don't miss a single episode. And until next time, be excellent to each other and party on, dudes!
Welcome back, and thank you for joining us in this most excellent journey back to the 80s. We hope that you have enjoyed this bodacious trip back to the last great decade and will travel with us again.